This video describes the production of these trapezoid segmented discs, cut at various angles and with different numbers of segments per layer. In a previous video I showed the production of these trapezoid shaped wedges for segmented wood turning. And these trapezoid shaped wedges were produced on a bandsaw using the Accu-Slice system by tilting the bandsaw at 10 degrees. And I produced these segmented disc. These contained 24 segments per ring, and two different styles here. And then I used one of these to produce this segmented wood egg with this trapezoid shaped segment as the centerpiece on the egg. And then I also took these pieces and I put them on the back on the bandsaw and I sliced thin layers and then flipped them and rotated them to get patterns such as this. So in that previous video I showed how to cut these, how to assemble it, and how to glue them. And the biggest problem was gluing, because these pieces, since they're angled, as you glue them they slip and slide all over the place. They're very, very difficult to glue. So I did come up with a new jig which I just developed that I'll be testing in this new video. It consists of a block with a bolt through the center, and then a disc that goes on top, and I can clamp this in place with a clamp, so it pushes the downward pressure as I'm clamping it from the inside. So this should work nicely. So we'll be giving this a try in this video. This video will be the first video in a series of studying the trapezoid shaped wedges for segmented wood turning, and I'll be looking at three different parameters in the production of these trapezoid shaped segments. First I'll be looking at the angle of the cut. These were cut at 10 degrees, but you can cut these at various degrees, and I did do a drawing here showing the difference between a 10 degree, 15 degree, and 20 degree angles of cutting these wedges. So I'll be looking at that in some of these projects. I'll also be looking at different number of segments per layer of each ring. I'm probably looking at 18, 24, 30, and possibly even some others. And then finally, I'll be looking at different patterns of stacking these trapezoid shaped segments together. And I did do a series of about 20 different drawings, looking at different shapes and patterns by stacking these in different patterns, putting different separating layers between the pieces, and then even doing some slicing of the disc to get some Indian shaped patterns. In this first video of this series, I'll be doing a study of different angles of wedges cut on the bandsaw to produce these trapezoid shaped wedges. I'll also be looking at different number of segments per ring using these trapezoid shaped wedges. Finally, I'll be showing how I use this new segmented disc glue up jig to glue up these segmented wedges. For each of these discs, I'll be attempting to cut the largest number of segments per layer. The number of segments per layer is determined first by the angle of the cuts on the bandsaw, and also by the dimensions of the wood boards from which the trapezoid segments are cut. The closer the angle the cut is to 90 degrees, the more segments you can get per layer. This is an example of a 105 degree angle, which is 15 degrees off of 90. You get a shape like this. And I could actually get more segments per layer. This was 24 segments per layer, but I probably could get maybe 30 or 36 segments per layer from this. As you increase the angle of the cut, this is 25 degrees off of 90 degrees, you get less segments per layer. Before you start to cut the trapezoid wedges on the bandsaw, you need to determine exactly how long to cut these wedges. I've created these tables of dimensions using the Woodturner Pro software. This chart consists of parameters for producing segmented disc from 2 inches to 8 inches in diameter for a given number of segments per disc. This particular chart is for 36 segments per ring. I made other charts for other quantities of segments per layer from 12 to 48 segments per layer. When I want a segmented disc 4 inches in diameter for 36 segments per layer, I just look at the chart and it tells me exactly what the length of the outer surface of the segmented wedge would be. This works great for segments with straight, parallel, and square sides. But what about the trapezoid segments? For this I can still use the same number for the outside length of the wedge. But now this number is the middle of the surface. This is my trapezoid wedge. This is my top surface. This wider area is my front surface. And my width of my ring is determined by the middle dimension of this surface. So I could measure that dimension and get a good estimate of what it might be. But a better method is to measure the bottom, record that dimension, measure this top length, add those two numbers together, divide by 2, and that's your width of your wedge that you can use from your chart to determine how big the ring is going to be. This segmented glue-up jig can easily be constructed in your shop. It consists of a 7-inch square by 3/4 inch thick piece of MDF. In the center of this board I drilled a 3/8 inch diameter hole, which I countersunk and inserted a 3/8 inch carriage bolt, and I did glue the carriage bolt in place. I then added a 1/4 inch thick piece of high density polyethylene plastic sheet with the same 3/8 inch hole in the center. The purpose of this plastic sheet is so that the glued up wedges will not stick to the MDF during the glue up process. I could also have used wax paper for the same purpose. The top plate is a 3/4 inch thick high density polyethylene disc between 4 and 4.5 inches diameter with the same 3/8 inch hole in the center. This plastic disc will be the clamping plate to hold the segmented disc in place during the gluing process. There's one additional component, and that's a center high density polyethylene plate. Again, this disc needs to be the exact same diameter as the inner diameter of your segmented disc. When I was gluing these up, I took my pieces, added glue, place them around here. Use this as a guide to keep everything nice and in place. I would then take after everything was glued in place, I would then put my top plate on, put a rubber band around here to get my initial contact, put my clamp in place to clamp it down so it doesn't move, add more rubber bands, add additional pressure to make sure the top and bottom of the segmented disc are all flush against the bottom and also the top. Rubber bands push everything in. The center disc keeps everything from getting jarred, so you get nice circular segmented rings. I designed this glue-up jig mainly for the segmented wedges of the trapezoid shape. In fact, you could not glue these up without this jig. However, it also works for gluing up regular segmented rings. By having this inner disc of the exact inside diameter of your finished ring, you get perfect circular disc. In order to make these trapezoid-shaped wedges, I need to tilt my bandsaw table. And I'll be tilting the bandsaw from 90 degrees, 10, 15, 20, or 25 degrees. In other words, I'll be creating angles of 100, 105, 110, 115 degrees between the bandsaw blade and the table. But before you tilt the bandsaw table, it's important you take the Accu-Slice and the Accu-Wedge system off the bandsaw. There's a lot of weight here. If you release this table, it's liable to flip on you. So to be safe, you should always take the Accu-Slice system off the bandsaw before you tilt the table. The Accu-Slice system is easily removed from the bandsaw. Just loosen the two mag jig clamps, then use an Allen wrench to loosen the 3 offset cam screws, and then lift it off the bandsaw table. I then release 2 clamps holding the table at the angle, and then tilt my bandsaw table. I can raise my blade guides, and I use a digital angle system to get my angle correct. And then when it's set, clamp it in place. So I set this to 100 degrees, which is 10 degrees off of 90. And I reattach my Accu-Slice system. Now this aluminum rail you see on here is from my previous video. I'm making the extended bandsaw table, so I just left the rail on. I took the tabletop off. And I reattach my Accu-Wedge next. And what I want to do is I want to get this table as close to the bandsaw blade as I can with nothing touching the bandsaw blade. because the closer you get this table to the bandsaw blade, the less vibration you're going to have on your board, so the smoother the cuts you're going to get. So I like to get it pretty close. It's about an 1/8 of an inch away. And lock it in place. And also lock your mag jigs. That gives you the additional, so it doesn't vibrate as much. Next, there's a number of changes that need to be made to the Accu-Wedge system because we're tilting the table. The first thing I did is I had to modify my ramp. This is my standard ramp, and if I put this on the table, it wouldn't be enough of an angle, the boards would not slide off. So I needed to make a higher angle on this so the boards slide off, but it's too long. So what I did is I cut about 2-3 inches off the end of my ramp, increased the angle, and mounted it back on the bandsaw. So this is a new ramp now versus the new one. So it's a lot shorter and a lot steeper angle. And again, I just positioned it on here, use some magnets to hold it in place. And that steeper angle now enables the boards to slide off away from the bandsaw blade. And again, I position that close but not quite touching the bandsaw blade on both sides of the blade. The next change I made was to the Accu-Wedge system itself. I removed the screws holding the dust ramp and reversed it 180 degrees. By reversing it, it puts the dust shield further away from this edge of the table and closer to the roller bearings. This gives you additional clearance, so you can get this table closer to your bandsaw blade. With the dust shield going the other way, I actually had to move the bandsaw table back away from the blade even further. By reversing this 180 degrees, I can get this table closer to the bandsaw blade. The next change is to the Accu-Stop. Because again the table's at an angle, when my boards are indexing on the stop, they're not hitting the bolt. So what I had to do is I took the bolt here and I moved it back behind this front plate. And I'm actually going to be adjusting my boards on this surface of this plate, not on the bolt. So I'm using this full surface as an adjustment position. The next change is I'm putting a stop on my rail. This is the same stop we use on the Accu-Sled, or excuse me, the Accu-Slot, and some other systems we've done. It's nothing more than a handle with a screw in. You could use any kind of stop that would, go in the rail on the Accu-Slice rail. And what I'm doing here, when I have my board in here at my correct angle, and I'm creating an index position, I want this board hitting exactly the same spot on my Accu-Stop every time. So by putting the stop here, I can adjust this to the end of the table, lock it in place, and when I cut my board, bring it back for the next thing, index it, cut, bring it back. It's always going to index in the same spot on the Accu-Stop. So it's just a stop to give me an accurate setting point. So I'm always indexing on the same position on this Accu-Stop. Since I'm not using the bolt, I'm using a larger surface. And if this is off, if you bring this back and it's off a little bit and this Accu-Stop is not perfectly parallel to your table, you're going to be off. So to get very accurate results, I want this index in the exact same position every time on the Accu-Stop. So that's the purpose of this bolt. So that's the final adjustment that needs to be made for the system. Again, that was, first of all, changing the angle on my ramp, reversing the dust shield, changing the adjustment on my Accu-Stop by pulling that bolt back, and adding this stop. And now I'm ready to run parts. I'm ready to cut my first set of boards, and I have a piece of dark walnut and maple here I'll be using. And they're about a little over 3/4 inch square. And I cut a piece off. I set my Accu-Wedge to 48 segments. I'm going to try and get 48 segments for this ring. It's pretty close. And I adjusted my Accu-Stop, and I adjusted my stop here, so my board's going to always index in the exact same spot on the Accu-Stop. I'd make one additional change. I added some stops on the rails on these carriages. And since my table's at an angle, that prevents these clamps from falling off the rail. It keeps it in the same position all the time, so it makes setup a little bit faster. I showed these in a previous video. This is my top surface. That's my top surface, and this is my front edge. I need a diameter, center diameter, of between 0.28 and 0.29 inches. So I did the calculation. I measured the top, I measured the bottom, divided by 2, and I got it right around 0.29, 0.30. So this is going to be just around a 4.5 inch diameter disc when it's done. It'll be 48 segments per disc. And that'll be the shape of the outer wedge on the outside. At the inside, you see it almost goes to a point. And that's a limiting factor. I can't have this go below a point. So I will be able to get 48 segments for this wedge. So it'll be 48 segments, about a 4.5 inch diameter disc when it's done. So again, I'm using 2 fences, like I did in the previous video. And I'm using this fence for the walnut board, and this fence will be for the maple board. I don't go back and forth like I do normally. I do everything from this, and I just keep reversing the board 180 degrees. But it is important to use boards for both carriages, which we'll show a little bit later. So I'm all set up now. I have my stop set here, my Accu-Stop set here, my length's adjusted. I just cut my first piece off. I reverse the board 180 degrees. It'll index in the same position on the Accu-Stop every time. In other words, I finish cutting the piece off, I bring it back, move it forward, tighten my clamp, and they're all set. And I do clamp my board. It's important you clamp your board so they don't move on you. And now it's just a matter of cutting 48 pieces. And 48 pieces now from both fences will give me 2 segmented rings. After each wedge is cut, I pull the board back, turn it 180 degrees, cut a second wedge, and just keep repeating the process. So that completes the walnut board. And I did mark my Accu-Stop. I put a pen mark there so I know exactly where it's hitting, because I got to change my stop when I go to the other fence. So I loosen my stop. Make my first cut to give me an angle. I first cut a piece off to give me an angle, then reverse the board 180 degrees, adjust it against my stop position. I set my stop on the rail, and then proceed to cut the various wedges. Okay, I have my 48 walnut, my 48 maple all cut. Now I need to sand the fuzzies off the edge. And you can see it here, a fuzzy and a burr. See pretty well in this piece. There's a burr there, and there's a fuzzy there, and another fuzzy there. So those all need to be sanded off. Now the other thing to keep in mind is I have pieces like this. Those all go on one system. And then I have pieces with the mark here, they go on the other system. So I'll keep these separate as I sand them. So just a light sanding to get rid of the burrs. I'm using some 220 grit sandpaper. I'm not really sanding the surface, I'm really trying to sand the corners to get rid of the fuzzies. And after it cleans up, it looks like that. I then continue sanding all the trapezoid segments and separating the segments based on the lines on the blocks. After sanding, I arrange the trapezoid wedges into the desired pattern, ready for gluing. And my jig's all set up. I have my center ring, which is a hair smaller than the actual ID of my ring. There's 48 segments here, and I'm going to use Type Bond 3 glue. And I know I don't have enough time to put them all in place before the glue sets. But I found what I can do is I can do 12 of them, put the top on, put a rubber band on it, let it set for like 2-3 minutes, take it off, and then continue doing that. So I can let the glue set in sets of maybe 10 or 12 pieces at a time, and eventually complete it. So we'll give it a try again and see how it works, because this is a lot of little pieces to do at once. I apply glue to both surfaces of the trapezoid wedges, setting them in place against the center plastic disc, and mating the surfaces of each trapezoid wedge, making sure the pieces are properly aligned against each other and also flush against the center plastic disc. By applying the glue very quickly, I was able to set up 24 or half the trapezoid wedges for clamping. I pushed all the trapezoid wedges lightly in against the center disc, make sure they're aligned, added the top disc, then placed a very weak rubber band around the pieces just so that get them initially in position. I can add an additional, maybe a little bit stronger rubber band to clamp a little bit tighter. And then I apply my screw-on clamp to clamp everything in place. I then continue to add additional rubber bands to more fully tighten the wedges and force them into correct position. In checking my wedges, I noticed that they weren't fully pulled down the whole way. The clamp tends to put pressure in the center, but the outer edge might be off a little bit. So I can add C-clamps to the outer edge to make sure I pull everything down flush against the top and bottom. The center plastic disc forces the wedges to a perfect circular shape. Rubber bands pull everything in nice and tight, and then the clamps pull everything down so they're perfectly flat against the top and bottom plastic disc. After the glued up trapezoid wedges I'm allowed to set for about 5 minutes, I remove the clamps, and then I remove the rubber bands, and then also remove the top clamp and the top plastic disc, and then proceed to glue up the remaining trapezoid wedges. Remaining trapezoid wedges are glued up just as was done for the previous ones. And when the last one's in place, I once again repeat the same process of applying the rubber bands and clamps to clamp everything in place. I'm doing here is just arranging rubber bands so it's more centered in the center of the wedges. I continue adding rubber bands to thoroughly push the pieces against that center disc, tighten the knob as it's needed, and here I'm double checking to make sure that the wedges are perfectly flush with the bottom and top disc. They're pretty good here, but I put the additional clamps on just to make sure that they're nice and tight. After allowing the glue to dry overnight, I take the finished segmented disc, and using my edge sander, I sand first of all the flat surfaces of both sides of the disc, and then I also sand the edge to round off the corners. And that finishes the segmented disc. After sanding to remove the excess glue and smooth out the surfaces, these are the two 4.5-inch diameter segmented discs consisting of 48 trapezoid wedges. The trapezoid wedges were sliced on a bandsaw at 100 degrees, that is 10 degrees greater than 90 degrees. Also notice the tight joints between each of the wedges. Next, I'll be changing the angle of the bandsaw table in increments of 5 degrees, from 105 degrees to 120 degrees, to create larger angles for the trapezoid segments, in order to determine what angles I will be using in my future projects. I just changed the angle of my bandsaw to 105 degrees. The previous one I just finished was 100 degrees, so I increased it 5 degrees. I took everything off and put everything back on. There's enough wood left over from that previous piece to do another set. So let me go ahead and do another set. We'll start with the maple board first, over here. And that'll be 105 degrees. And I have it set to 36 segments. I then sliced 36 trapezoid-shaped wedges from the maple board at an angle of 105 degrees and a wedge length of 0.39 inches to produce the 4.5-inch diameter disc, I then repeat the process on the walnut board. After sanding the trapezoid wedges to remove the fuzzies, gluing them together to produce the segmented disc, and then sanding to clean up the excess glue, as was shown in the first example, these are the two 4.5-inch diameter segmented discs consisting of 36 trapezoid wedges which were sliced on a bandsaw at 105 degrees, that is 15 degrees greater than 90 degrees. I just increased the angle of the bandsaw table to 110 degrees, so that's 5 degrees more than the last one. And I'm using a piece of wood that's a little bit thicker than the previous piece. I got some yellow heart, and I'm not sure what this is. So I have it set up to 24 segments per ring, and according to calculation that should be about 0.5. To get a bit 4.5 should be about 0.59, and that's exactly what it is, 0.59. So it should be a 4.5-inch piece of wood. Once again, the two boards were cut on the two rails at 110 degrees at a wedge length of 0.59 inches to produce 24 segments per ring. After sanding the trapezoid wedges to remove the fuzzies, gluing them together to produce the segmented disc, and then sanding to clean up the excess glue as shown in the first example, these are the two 4.5-inch diameter segmented discs consisting of 24 trapezoid wedges which were sliced on the bandsaw at 110 degrees. That is, they were sliced at 20 degrees greater than 90 degrees. And I just increased my angle to 115 degrees, so that's 25 degrees off of 90. And I changed the number of segments to 18 segments per ring. And this ring will be about 4.5 inches in diameter. And once again, I cut 18 trapezoid-shaped wedges off each of the two boards at the 115 degree angle. The trapezoid wedges were sanded, arranged into two segmented discs, and are now ready for glue-up. Once again, after sanding the trapezoid wedges to remove the fuzzies, gluing them together to produce the segmented disc, and then sanding to clean up the excess glue, as was shown in the previous example, these are the two 4.5-inch diameter segmented discs consisting of 18 trapezoid wedges which were sliced on a bandsaw at 115 degrees, that is 25 degrees greater than the 90 degrees. Next, I just increased the angle of the blade to 120 degrees, so that's what, 30 degrees off of the 90. So for this one, I'm using some like a red heart and some cherry. So let's start with the cherry. So again, we're at 120 degrees, which is 30 degrees off of 90, and we're at 16 segments per ring. And this ring should give you about 4.5 inches in diameter. The trapezoid wedges were sanded, arranged into two segmented discs, and are ready for glue up. This is going to be the most difficult of the rings to glue up because it has the largest angle. These were cut at 120 degrees, so each of these pieces actually is an equilateral triangle. All the sides are exactly the same size, all the angles are exactly 120 degrees. So it's going to have the most movement up and down as I glue it. I just jig the rubber band on to get the size of the inner ring, because I try to get that inner ring as close as possible so it doesn't have much movement. I once again apply glue to all the surfaces of the trapezoid segments and position them against the center ring, and then put the top plate on, put a rubber band around it, clamp it in position, and then continue to add additional rubber bands to clamp everything in place. Even though the angle of each of the trapezoid segments was 120 degrees, using this glue-up jig, I saw no movement of the trapezoid segments during the glue-up process. It worked very nice for gluing up these 120 degree angle wedges. These wedges could never have been glued up without using a jig such as this. This is the final set of trapezoid segmented discs produced for this study. After sanding the trapezoid wedges to remove the fuzzies, gluing them together to produce a segmented disc, and then sanding to clean up the excess glue as was shown in the previous example, these are the two 4.5-inch diameter segmented discs consisting of 16 trapezoid wedges which were sliced on the bandsaw at 120 degrees, that is 30 degrees greater than the 90 degrees. This concludes this first video of this series on trapezoid segmented wedges. In this first video of the trapezoid segment series, I cut a variety of trapezoid segmented wedges at angles from 100 degrees to 120 degrees and with 16 to 48 segments per layer to evaluate the trapezoid patterns of the segmented disc generated by these various cutting parameters. For this study, all the assembled and glued trapezoid segment discs are between 4 and 4.5 inches in diameter, and I attempted to get the maximum number of segments per layer possible at the selected cutting angle. In this video, I also tested out my new glue jig for gluing the trapezoid segmented wedges to produce the segmented disc. This new glue-up jig worked quite well, enabling me to glue up the wedges without them slipping and sliding all over the place, as was observed in my video produced several years ago. I was able to produce these trapezoid segmented wedges using the Accu-Wedge sled on the Accu-Slice index table. Normally when producing segmented wedges, the bandsaw blade is perpendicular to the Accu-Wedge sled. In order to produce these angled trapezoid shaped wedges, the bandsaw table was tilted at various angles from 100 degrees to 120 degrees. This is the results of this study. In this first two samples here, I set the bandsaw blade angle to 100 degrees, in other words 10 degrees off of 90 degrees. And I was able to produce 48 segments in this 4-inch diameter segmented disc. I then increased the angle to 105 degrees for the second sample, which generated 36 segments per layer. I continued to increase the angle of the cut. With each increase in the angle of the cut, the number of wedges per disc decreased, and the base length of the trapezoid pattern increased. In this next sample, I set the angle to 110 degrees, and I was able to get 24 segments in this disc. When the angle was increased to 115 degrees, I was able to get 18 segments in the disc. In this final test, I increased the angle to 120 degrees, and I was able to get 16 segments in this disc. And each of these wedges now is an equilateral triangle, because the angle was set to 120 degrees. Here is a side-by-side comparison of all 5 sets of the trapezoid segmented disc that were cut at 100, 105, 110, 115, and 120 degrees. It visually demonstrates the effect of the angle of the cut on a number of segments per disc. So for a future project, I need to balance, the angle of the cut versus the number of segments I want to give me a particular look for my project. Additional videos are planned in the future using what I learned in the production of these trapezoid-shaped discs. I'll be taking some of these discs, arranging them in some unique patterns to give me some ideas for my project. I can use patterns such as this. I could use patterns such as this. There's a whole variety of different patterns that I could be using to produce projects. In addition, I'll be taking some of these, I'll be putting them back on a bandsaw, making some slices, and creating some Indian or Southwestern design projects. So those projects are coming shortly. Once again, thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions or concerns, please give us a call or drop us an email. We'll be glad to hear from you.